What's up, guys? Caleb Roth here with my pals,
John
and Matthew,
and we are excited to share with you the results of the 100 Book Challenge 1 year later. All right, so we are exactly 1 year after the end of the challenge. I think we're a week away. So the challenge ended at the end of
close to the end of May
2018. It is currently May 6th, and we've got John and Matthew again. We're going to recap the models that they used. Not supermodels, but the business models that they used. And we're going to go through some of their numbers and share with you what maybe you can expect in your own 100 book challenge. So many of you have kicked off your own 100 book challenge or 50 book challenge or 500 book challenge.
Go.
And many of you have shared the results with us, and that's been exciting. It's been awesome to follow along. If you haven't yet started your own, jump on in. It's still a great time to be selling on Amazon and selling books. And if you do, by all means, drop us a line, comment below, and share with us some of those results. So before we jump in, we want to kind of share the different business models that each of these guys were using. So Matthew, you want to give just a 30-second overview of kind of what you were doing when it came to finding books?
Yep, so my goal for the 100 Book Challenge was to specifically source 100 books a week going to local libraries and thrift stores. So I'd drive out, I had different libraries and thrift stores that I'd set up, I'd go to each week, I'd go scan the books there, and my goal was to take home 100 books each week. First few weeks took a lot longer of time. Once I kind of dialed in what stores I wanted to go to, I was able to lower that a lot more. And right at the end of the challenge, I averaged right about 100 books a week, just going to local libraries and thrift stores, no special relationships or anything like that. Just looking them up on Google, finding the ones near me, and going and sourcing from those locations.
So very, very traditional model. Did you source at garage sales?
No garage sales.
No friends and family?
No, I think I went to 2 library sales throughout the challenge, but that was it other than libraries and thrift stores.
So most of you, especially if you live in a decently sized city, have the ability to do exactly what Matthew did. You can go to thrift stores. There's some standing library sales where they just have books available for sale around the year, not just once or twice a year at a library sale. So again, a very traditional model. If you live in any size city, this model should be appropriate and something that you can do as well.
I think one quick important thing to note too is that even though we live in the Denver metro area and there's, I don't know, how many thrift stores do you think are around here, libraries?
Probably 100.
Probably 100 something around us. I really had about 10 stores I would go to consistently that I kind of made my rounds with every week. I wasn't going to 50, 60 stores. Even though it's nice to have the options, I didn't need those to get the 100 books a week. I really found about 8 to 10 stores that I would go to and just cycle through each week, and I was able to get the books just with those amount of locations. So even though it's nice to have 100 locations, you don't need that to source 100 books a week.
Perfect. So again, very traditional model. John's model was a little bit different. You want to explain kind of what you had going on?
Sure thing. I did a modified bulk arrangement. I actually worked with a local thrift store who sold things through auctions, and I would go to those auctions and purchase a Gaylord or 2 or a bin at a time and be able to pull out what I wanted from there and just leave the rest there. So it's still cherry picking and still working with thrift stores, just doing it a little bit differently where all the books were at one place and I was able to go through a Gaylord or a bin while I was there. So it's nice because you get access to more books at once and you're purchasing all those books, so you can keep some books that are going to make less profit than you would normally keep. So that's the benefit there, really.
So give us a rough idea. You would drive up to the auction, bid on a bin of books. They were yours. You could just go through them on the spot. And roughly what were you paying for a bin?
So I was roughly paying about $50 per bin. They would fluctuate from week to week, and it would depend on who else was there. If someone was bidding against me, then I might have to pay a little more. But usually it came out to about $50 per bin. And on an average bin, I was usually pulling out somewhere between 75 to 100 books per bin. So my cost per book was a little lower.
Yeah, so your average cost in general was a little bit closer to, I think you had about 75 cents.
Right.
74 cents.
Yeah. Versus Matthew's average cost was going to be a little bit higher. So let's go through the numbers. Again, Matthew hit his goal almost exactly. It was a 13-week challenge. His total units listed was 1,316. So just over 100 books per week. And again, roughly how many hours per week do you estimate on average? So about
11 hours a week.
11 hours a week that Matthew was going at it, and that allowed him to source. That included drive time, and that included listing.
Close to the house, yeah.
Yep, so about 11 hours a week allowed him to source and list 100 books a week. John, because he was buying in bulk, he was able to buy a few more books. So it looks like your total units listed
It was around 2349.
Okay.
Yep.
So Matthew did about 1,300. John did a little over 2,300. So not quite 200 books a week, but getting a little bit closer. Let's look at a few more metrics. Again, Matthew, because he was cherry picking, his average cost was a little bit higher. His average cost came in at $1.98 per book. And again, he's scanning a book and deciding if he wants to spend the money on it. John, because he spent the money up front, could actually source books that would make him a little bit less because it was a fixed cost. He got $50 investment for however many books he could pull out. So even if you could make, 50 cents a book, $1 a book?
I was around 90 cents was my starting profit.
Okay, so if he could make at least 90 cents, he was willing to take the risk and snag. He already bought it, but essentially list the book.
Yep.
So John's average cost was 74 cents a book. So let's look at where we did. We want to share a couple numbers. We don't want to get too dug up into it, but let's share the numbers at the end of the year, and then we'll jump in and kind of break those down. So John, his total sales at the end of a year, ready for it? $26,798. So almost $27,000 of sales. But because his average sale price was pretty low, it was a little bit under $13, because again, he was doing a bulk sort of setup. His total cash flow, we're not going to look at profit, cash flow, which is dollars spent on the book, dollars spent inbound shipping, minus all of Amazon's fees, right? So let's break that down slightly differently. Total sales minus buy costs minus inbound shipping to Amazon minus Amazon's fees equals cash flow. Okay, that's really what matters. You can talk profit and loss, and basically that's tracking down the cost of goods sold. So we're not going to look at that. We're just going to look at cash flow. So John's cash flow, his total outlay was, do we have that?
$8,081.
So total cash flow, profit back in John's bank account at the end of the challenge was just under $8,100. Not bad. Matthew's sales, ready for it, were right at $15,000 a year out. His total cash flow was a little over $3,800. So profit back into his bank account when all the dust settled was about $3,800. What's interesting is when we break this down, a couple things stand out. Let's look at the turn rates as well. So Matthew sold exactly 75% of his inventory. And I think when the challenge started, we told people to expect to sell between
80%-ish is what we're, 70 to 80%.
So a good number to shoot for is if you list 100 books, you're not going to sell them all. Sometimes the price drops, sometimes the e-score wasn't that great, maybe nobody's buying the book, maybe a bunch of lowball people come in on the listing and you can't sell it at a profit, so you just let it sit. But we typically expect to sell around 80%. So Matthew sold 75%, John sold a little bit better, maybe his pricing was better, maybe he bought better books, but his sell-through rate was 86%. So again, somewhere in that range, you should expect to sell about 80%. Let's look at some of the numbers at the end of the challenge, because it's one thing to say that Matthew made $3,800 a year later. That doesn't sound that glamorous, but let's break it down into an hourly wage as well as what the cash flow looked like at the end of the challenge, 3 months down the road, 6 months, and then 12 months. So at the end of the challenge, he's still listing items, right? So he's still spending money, but his total cash flow, by the time the 13 weeks ended, he had sold 33% of his books already, so a third of his inventory was sold. Again, the more you list early on, the faster the items sell. If your sales are ever struggling, make sure you list items, because new inventory equals more sales. So he'd sold a third of his inventory by the end of the 13 weeks, and his cash flow was already a positive $918, which is awesome. 3 months later, he'd sold 59% of all of his inventory. So remember, his total that he sold was 75, and within 3 months of the end of the challenge, or 6 months from day one, he'd already sold nearly 60% of the inventory. His cash flow was $2,900. And then after 6 months, his cash flow was $3,500. At the end of 12 months, it was $3,826, it looks like. So again, and we'll show those numbers up on the screen so you can see them as well if you're visual. But the idea is you put the work in at first. So we like to talk about Amazon as a funnel. And the beautiful thing is you put books into the top of the funnel, and then over time, the sales just trickle out, the profits trickle out, assuming that you managed it. So how much work did you do managing your account after the challenge ended?
Very little. I repriced probably once a month, and that was about it. So
Okay. So no customer emails to answer. You weren't shipping out orders at this point.
Right. I mean, a few customer emails, but I probably averaged one customer email maybe a month, maybe every 6 weeks. So hardly anything there.
So the beautiful thing with Amazon is, again, we're using the Prime program. We're fulfilled by Amazon. So these guys both shipped all their books into Amazon at the end of the challenge or throughout the challenge. After that, they never had to fulfill an order. So Matthew and I would be in our office working. He'd be selling a couple books a day, a couple books a week, whatever it turned out to be. And he wasn't having to go home and fulfill those orders or message the customers. Amazon took care of all of that. So again, the funnel's beautiful. All we have to do is focus on finding books, put them into the funnel. Amazon is going to take care of the rest, and then money eventually trickles down back into our bank accounts, and you can choose to reinvest it, pull it back out, spend it on beef jerky and whatever else you want to buy. So
That's the goal, beef jerky.
Beef jerky, living large. So those are Matthew's numbers. Again, at the end of the challenge, 3 months into it, his cash flow is just a little under $1,000. 3 months after the challenge, his cash flow is close to $3,000, and now 12 months out, it's just under $4,000. So John's numbers are a little bit higher because he listed a lot more books. He listed almost twice as many books. At the end of the challenge, so 3 months after he started, he had already sold 27%. So about 30% of the inventory. His cash flow, Matthew's was $918, John's was $1174. So cash flow was similar. Again, he's spending more money overall between inbound shipping and the cost of goods. At 3 months, John had already sold 69% of his inventory. So he'd already sold the vast majority, and his cash flow at the end of 3 months was $6,700. So that's the beauty of the system. Again, from at the end of the challenge, month 3 to month 6, John did virtually no work, and his cash flow went from $1,100 to $6,700. So he was able to profit $5,000, pretty much residual income. The work was already done up front, and the sales just kept trickling in. At 6 months, John had sold 78%, $7,560 of cash flow, and by the end of the challenge, or at the end of 12 months, he's at 86% inventory turn, total cash flow of, looks like a little over $8,000. So again, that's the beauty of the challenge. You put the work in, you list everything, and then eventually everything continues to sell. So let's talk through dollars per hour, because this will actually give you a relatively good idea of what this looks like. So Matthew, you said you worked how many hours a week?
It averaged out to be about 11 hours a week at the end of the challenge, spending time to source and list those books and send them off.
So we'll put some numbers right above our heads, somewhere up in here. But you can check our math. So Matthew's total cash flow was $3,826. So 38, let's do it exactly. 38, 25, 55 divided by 11 hours a week times 13 weeks. And we'll put that math just above us. I think it came to a little under $27 an hour. Now he's only working 11 hours a week. So if you could extrapolate, instead of hitting your 10 sources, if you actually expanded that and went and hit about 40 sources a week, or hit some bigger library sales, if you tried to maximize your time and work a normal 9 to 5 job, so 40 hours a week, then at $27 an hour, that would actually extrapolate. There's 2,000 hours that you work in a year. So $27 an hour roughly extrapolates out to $54,000 a year. Not bad for flipping books on Amazon. Let's look at John's numbers. Looks like his total cash flow, I've got 2 different numbers. I don't know which one's accurate. This one probably?
This one's accurate.
So total cash flow at the end of the challenge, so right now, through May 6th, a year later, is $8,235. His total hours per week, what do we estimate?
It was around 20 hours per week, and towards the end, it was actually closer to 25.
So at the beginning, you were working about 15 hours a week.
Right.
Toward the end, you were ramping up, and you were also trying to list pallets, so it was a little different workflow.
It was a little different workflow and a little bit of a learning curve.
For sure.
So,
but he was willing to try some new stuff. It drove down his inbound shipping costs a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's use a rough number of 20 hours a week. That's a good balance between the 15 hours a week for most of the weeks early on, and then the last couple of weeks were probably around 25. So 20 hours a week times 13 weeks is 260 hours. Cash flow was $82.35 divided by 260. Check the math on the screen above. I believe that's right around $31 an hour.
Yep, somewhere around there.
Again, if you extrapolate that out, he's only working half a week to generate the revenue. If you extrapolate that out and assume he's working full time, $31 an hour is roughly equivalent to $62,000 a year. So if you're able to keep that model going and work 40 hours a week, again, assuming similar efficiency, you should be making somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000.
Yep.
So not bad overall. Again, the median salary, we'll have to look that up. We'll show that, put a source on the screen as well. I think the median income in the U.S. right now is somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 grand. So you're looking at somewhere about 54 grand to 62 grand. Again, different models, similar results per hour, which is really interesting. So any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, I think the biggest thing about this is just the consistency part of it. Like I showed in the first few videos, I listed 100 books every single week consistently, but the first month of the challenge, my total sales were somewhere around $800, maybe got close to $900. Second month was like $2,400. The third month was when sales got to 4,000 something. So even though it's listing the same amount of books, it builds as you do. Is the consistency is the key with this. You can't do it for 6 weeks and expect to see everything. It's not going to come that fast. But if you put in the time, it'll keep trickling in up to a year later, like we're talking about now. I stopped at 12 weeks for the challenge, and we're still getting sales even this past week from that challenge. So it still trickles in if you put in that consistency at the beginning. So
perfect. So it's a long race. Be like the tortoise, not like the hare. Again, that funnel concept. You're putting a bunch of books into the hopper, and they don't always just sell right away. If they did, that'd be awesome. But it's a numbers game. The more you put into there, the more your inventory grows, the more you're eventually going to sell. And again, it's not true residual income because you had to work to put them in there to begin with, but they do keep selling even after you stop putting the effort in. Final thoughts from you, John?
Well, I would reiterate what Matthew said. It is all about consistency, and I would even say, the lower cost that you can get, that was the real benefit for me and why my cash flow was higher, and more books. But just having that lower cost really does help. So the more you can build relationships, that's where you're going to find lower cost. So I wasn't really doing anything special, but because I was going to an auction, I was able to interact with people. And so every time I showed up, they were like, "Oh, you're the book guy. We know exactly what to pull out for you. We can help you out." And so people were willing to help. So it's all about being nice to people, interacting with people, and building those relationships. And eventually something will come. So that'll help you get the cost down a little bit. So just keep up with it.
There's a phrase that you make money when you buy, not when you sell. So your average buy cost 74 cents versus $1.98.
Yeah.
Dollars per hour are still roughly the same. If you had been able to negotiate, maybe get some backroom access, maybe work out a consignment deal, maybe you could have driven your costs down and driven your profit up. But bottom line, guys, if you're sitting at home going, "Man, I want to get started, I want to get my side hustle going," again, you don't have to quit your day job. Matthew still had a day job doing marketing. John is still a full-time seminary student.
Yep.
So these guys both had full-time jobs, so to speak, and they were able to fit in what they were doing with books on the side. Matthew about 11 hours a week, which that's pretty easy to do even if you have a full-time job. John, because he's a student, has a little bit more time available, but he was able to work in about 20 hours a week. Yeah. And again, both these guys have infants at home. John's got a 1-year-old now. Matthew's got just 2-year-olds.
now.
So both of them had their hands full. They both got a wife at home as well. So it's not like they're just sitting there and they have all kinds of hours to play with. They made sacrifices.
John had the baby during the challenge, if I remember right, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was
right
during
at
the
the
challenge, right
beginning.
at the beginning. So
he had all kinds of excuses. But again, the point is you can get started. Is it better to get consignment deals? Is it best to work out backroom deals? Absolutely. But the key is to get started. So don't overcomplicate it. Don't overthink it. If you love to tinker, go ahead and do that. John learned how to do pallets right in the middle of it. That was a big learning curve. Yeah. But you don't have to do that. When you're just starting out, follow the steps that other people have taken before. Utilize Amazon, utilize FBA, fulfilled by Amazon. Just make sure you can get the books listed. Is there a most efficient way to list it? Could you go from listing 40 books an hour to 80? Probably. But again, don't focus so much on the little nitty-gritty details. Focus instead on finding more inventory and just make sure your system works. Once the system's working, once you've got inventory in your funnel and everything starts to sell, then you're able to go back in and then fine-tune. So both of these guys, knowing what they know now, you could probably hit stores quicker. You could get in and out of the store quicker.
Yep. You
could probably make deals with some of the stores to get backroom access. I'm sure you could list more books an hour than you could back then.
Yep.
All of those small tweaks can take his average hourly wage from $27 an hour and push that closer to 30, 35, maybe even 40. So as you get into this and you get smarter, you can actually start making more money. Same with John.
Yep.
He could leverage relationships. He could hire a scout team. He's starting to buy books by the truckload now, so a little bit different model.
Yeah.
But again, don't overly complicate it when you start out. Just make sure you can get started. Stick to a goal and then be consistent with it. And if you do that, we'd love to hear your success story as well. So that's it.
Yep.
On behalf of myself, Matthew, and John, thanks for watching. Thanks for coming along and enjoying their journey. And we hope that you can go and start your very own.